Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Draco Veritas. So just like all the other times we've been discussing, trigger warnings apply. So if you have a lot of sensitivities to a lot of very yikes topics, then it might be a good idea to sit this one out. Anyway, without further ado, let's just get right into it. The Malfoy Family Code of Conduct.
À la claire fontaine, m'en allant promener, j'ai trouvé l'eau si belle que je m'y suis baignée.
Il y a longtemps que je t'aime, jamais je ne t'oublierai.
Sous les feuilles d'un chêne, je me suis fait sécher. Sur la plus haute branche, un rossignol chantait.
Il y a longtemps que je t'aime, jamais je ne t'oublierai.
Chante, rossignol, chante, toi qui as le cœur gai. Tu as le cœur à rire, moi je l'ai à pleurer.
Il y a longtemps que je t'aime, jamais je ne t'oublierai.
J'ai perdu mon ami sans l'avoir mérité, pour un bouquet de roses que je lui refusais.
Il y a longtemps que je t'aime, jamais je ne t'oublierai.
Je voudrais que la rose fût encore au rosier, et que mon doux ami fût encore à m'aimer.
Il y a longtemps que je t'aime, jamais je ne t'oublierai.
When he opened his eyes, she stopped singing, startled. He had been asleep so long that she had almost forgotten that she was waiting for him to wake up. When he stirred, she broke off and leaned over him, her long hair brushing his hand, and whispered, "Ellie?" The green eyes looked up at her. His sopping hair was pasted to his forehead in limp, dark streaks. He had already sweated through 4 pairs of pajamas, and the ones he now wore were comically oversized. "Hermione?" he said, squinting up at her. His voice was raspy soft, vague with sleep. "Is that you?" "No," she said, and reached for the glass of water on the bedside table. "It's not Hermione. I searched for you on the beach, but I couldn't find you," he whispered. "I wanted to tell you I was looking for him." She halted with the glass in her hand, arrested by curiosity. "Who are you looking for?" "Ron," he said impatiently, as if she ought to know this. "I lost him, but I'm going to find him again." She lowered the glass of water to his mouth. "You were dreaming, Harry," she said. "Please, drink this." But he turned his head away, and the water splashed over his chin and onto his already soaked pajamas. His hand went to his throat, and he closed his fingers as if he expected to find something there, but they closed on air. He shook his head fretfully. "I left the epicelical charm with my letters," he whispered. "You got my letters, didn't you?" He started to struggle up to a sitting position, but she put a hand on his chest and pushed him back down. Weak as a kitten, he flopped back on the pillows. "You're not well, baby," she said. "You need your rest." He turned his head into the pillow, his eyes shut. Across his chest, he held his left hand tightly with his right, as if it were injured. His breathing slowed, and he fell back into dreams.
We interrupt Wake Up with Warbeck to bring you this emergency bulletin from the Daily Prophet. A surprise attack on the Wizarding House in Devon has left the magical community stunned. As of this report, there is one confirmed death. Information is sparse, but it has been confirmed that a killing curse was not responsible, although sources claim that a message was found written in blood on the wall inside the...
Hermione groped blearily for the volume control on the Wizarding wireless next to the bed, and succeeded in knocking the radio to the floor. It made a springing noise, popped a coil, and fell silent. She hung off the edge of the bed, gazing down at it for a moment. "Oh, honestly," she muttered under her breath. "What a way to wake up. As if we haven't—" She broke off, suddenly wide-eyed, remembering the night before. She'd fallen asleep with Draco's arms around her, her hands knotted across his back. They must have untangled themselves sometime during the night, but she had no memory of it. Hermione pulled herself back onto the bed, cleared her throat, and turned around. "Draco, are you—" The words died on her lips. The other side of the bed was unoccupied, the sheets pulled smooth, the pillow jammed against the headboard, still crumpled where he slept on it. A feeling of unease washed over her. Then she told herself she was just being silly. Surely he'd merely gotten up to take a shower. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and padded, barefoot, into the living room. It was empty. The fireplace was full of smashed glass, the wall dented where she'd thrown the candlestick. Draco's jacket was on the floor, but his boots were gone. She could feel the blood rise into her face and hurried towards the bathroom, pausing only to pick up the flask where she had thrown it the night before. For a moment, she cradled it against her chest, then tucked it into the pocket of her dressing gown and hurried down the hall to the bathroom. It was empty, although a damp towel flung over a rail showed her that he had, indeed, showered that morning. The second bedroom was also empty, as was the kitchen. By the time Hermione reached the door to the balcony and flung it open, her heart was pounding. But the balcony was bare, and the wind was icy. Shivering, she slid her hands into the pockets and gazed blindly down at the view of Diagon Alley below. Its wheel-rutted streets glazed gunmetal gray with dirty snow. Crowds of black-clad witches and wizards, hoods up over their faces, hurried to and fro on the pavement. He could have been any one of them. Hermione tightened her grip on the flask in her pocket and knew that she would have to wait until he returned.
And Pansy masterminded all this. Pansy Parkinson,
Sirius said, for what Ginny thought irritably had to be the 6th time. She had no idea why this was so difficult to believe. She had never liked Pansy, and had always assumed her to be a bad lot. That Pansy would attempt to kill Draco while simultaneously seducing Ron for nefarious purposes seemed to be on par for Slytherin House.
"Yes, Pansy Parkinson," said Blaise, whose frightened expression had given way to one of slight impatience. She was sunk deep into one of Professor Dumbledore's worn green armchairs, and was regarding Sirius across the room with a defensive expression.
Never trust a girl who wears green and orange together, I always say.
Yes, I'm sure that's a detail we'll all try to keep in mind, Miss Sabini,
replied Snape dryly.
Do you have any idea if any other students knew what she was up to?
Dumbledore interjected softly, evidently eager to keep the topic on track. Malcolm, maybe, said Blaise thoughtfully. They were close. Other than that, I don't think most of us had more than a general idea that something bad was coming.
And you didn't think it important to tell anyone this? Sirius asked, his tone holding an edge that Ginny couldn't quite read.
Blaise raised her chin. Why would I? She said shortly. You treat us Slytherins like second-class citizens. You think we're all liars and untrustworthy.
I don't think it matters very much whether Miss Sabini thought it pertinent to tell us what she knew in the past. She's telling us now, Sirius,
Dumbledore said, his tone gentle. Blaise glanced down, but before she could respond, the door opened and Lupin came in. Ginny suspected he had been dealing with the effects of the upcoming full moon, and that was why he was so late to this meeting. Sorry, he said as he came in. I don't mean to interrupt, but Ginny, there is someone in my office that wishes to speak with you. Who? She asked, confused. Lupin looked quickly at Dumbledore before he answered. It's Draco, he said. Ginny glanced at Blaise, who looked back at her in surprise, but it was Dumbledore who spoke.
If Draco wants to talk to Miss Weasley, then of course we will not prohibit that, he said. Besides, I want a few more minutes alone with Miss Sabini. Please give our regards to him, Miss Weasley, and let him know that we have matters settled on our end.
Yes, Professor, Ginny replied hesitantly, then looked back over at Blaise, who had gone a chalky sort of white, but otherwise looked composed. The other girl looked back at her and gave a small nod, confirming that she would be all right, and Ginny returned the gesture with one of her own. Then she was walking swiftly down the corridor, Lupin at her side, before they stepped in front of his office door. He pushed it open and let her walk through, shutting it firmly behind her. Over here, Ginny. A voice came from the fire in the grate, which was low, and there, visible from the waist up, was Draco. Little flames were licking up around his face and hair, making him look as if he had been outlined in metallic ink. He was wearing a thoughtful expression and a vastly oversized black jumper. Ginny squinted. Is there some reason you're bundled up like that? She asked, not knowing why, but usually Draco was impeccably dressed, and the jumper had the effect of making him look buried to the neck in fabric. It's cold where I'm at, he said, then peered in her direction. Come over here. I can hardly see you. She went and knelt down next to the grate. Dumbledore wanted me to tell you that he's handling things on our end, she said. Where are you, anyway? Diagon Alley, he said, ignoring her first statement altogether. Have you found Harry? A muscle in his jaw twitched, but he said, Yes, but we lost him again. Ginny raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? It means that I'm frustrated as all hell, and when I woke up this morning, I wanted to see you and talk to you. Her heart gave a small leap despite herself. I've wanted to see you, too, since you left, she said. How are you feeling? Should I portkey to wherever you and Hermione are? No, he said, not yet. And I'm fine. But I wanted to ask if you've heard any news about your brother's whereabouts. Ginny shook her head. No,
Nothing. Why? I just had an idea of what he might be up to. Like what? Ginny asked, although the answer terrified her. This morning, it occurred to me what his plans might be now that he has a new body, Draco said. Then I overheard the news on the Wizarding Wireless. Did you happen to catch it? Ginny shook her head. Blaise and I have been in Dumbledore's office all morning explaining everything. Ah, said Draco. Well, prepare yourself then, because the news isn't good, and I wouldn't be surprised if Sirius and Lupin get called in soon to deal with it. What do you mean? Ginny asked, slightly alarmed. What happened? Draco hesitated for a moment, then decided to plunge forward. People are dead, Ginny, and not just any people. He reached a hand out from the flames, and Ginny could see a small piece of parchment in between his fingers. She took it, and was about to unfold it, when the door swung open, and Blaise came in, looking mildly jumpy. She stood in the doorway, her hand on her hip, and her expression changed to one of dry incredulity when she saw Draco. Well, well, she said, the prodigal son returns. I assume you made this call to sort out the details of your bizarre love triangle. It's more of a love square, said Draco, and grinned at Ginny. Wouldn't you agree? Well, I suppose you could call it that, Ginny replied. That is assuming, of course, that Harry is harboring an illicit passion for my brother. Draco made a disgusted noise. Ginny, I just ate. Ron's not unattractive, really, Blaise observed thoughtfully, coming more fully into the room. He has a sort of lanky charm. Well, be sure to tell him the next time you see him, Draco said disconsolately, assuming that Voldemort, who is currently possessing his body, doesn't murder you first. Don't even joke about that, Draco, Ginny shot back fiercely. Sorry, he said, and she could tell he meant it. You're still in one piece, though, said Blaise, her voice bright and a little brittle. For now, Draco said, but that's not what's important. What is important is that I wrote down a list of names. Names I think might be useful to what's going on. After you've read it, give it to Sirius. He'll know what to do. The fire sparked up behind him, the color wavering from gold into a paler yellow. Ginny knew that meant he was about to disappear. My time is up here, he said, his voice sounding suddenly tinny, as if it were coming from a great distance. I have to go. Please be careful, Ginny said. When you find Harry again, don't let him talk you into anything stupid. Draco looked almost amused. Don't worry, he said. I won't. Ginny's next words came out of her mouth without any foreknowledge on her part. I love you, Draco, she said. His head jerked up, and he stared at her, an expression of absolute astonishment on his face. She stared back, not caring that Blaise was beside her with an open mouth. She had said it, although really he must have known. How could he not? Before he could respond, the fire sputtered. The flames changed color again, from pale yellow to blue and then to green. Draco looked surprised for a moment, and then vanished. Ginny was not sure if she was glad that he hadn't been unable to respond to her declaration or not. Realizing that she was still holding the folded parchment in her hand, she unfolded it slowly with a sigh. Distantly, she heard Blaise's voice asking her a question. What is that? It was a list of names. Thaddeus Knott, Elafaharia Parpus, Charles Travers, Linton Avery. For several long moments, Ginny and Blaise stared blankly at the list. Does this mean anything to you? Ginny asked,
Blaze shook her head. It looks like a list of Death Eaters, but for the life of me I can't think of what he would have wanted us to have that for. Shrugging, Ginny folded it up and slid it into her pocket before getting to her feet. He said to give it to Sirius to sort out, so I think that's exactly what we should do. Hermione was in the kitchen when she heard the door of the hotel room open and close. She had been making a new batch of antidote, adding tinzan of bloodroot, flower of antimony, wormwood infusion, powdered mandrake. When she heard the click of the lock, she dropped the pestle she'd been using to smash the mandrake to powder and bolted out of the kitchen. Draco was standing in front of the door, unbuckling the front of his cloak. His hood was down, and there were flakes of snow caught in his hair. He looked up as she raced into the room, a startled expression crossing his face as she flung herself at him, almost knocking him back into the wall. His arms went around her for a moment before he stepped back from her quickly. "I thought something happened," she began, but he pushed her away. "Careful," he said. "There's ash all over my clothes." Hermione glanced down at herself. The front of her white nightgown was now smudged with dark gray streaks. "I see that," she said, irritation beginning to flood over her relief as she realized that what she had thought was snow in his hair was actually ash. "And where were you? You could have told me you were going out." "You were asleep. I didn't want to wake you. We went to bed rather late, if you remember." His voice was light, careless as he undid the last buckle on his cloak and threw it over the back of a nearby armchair. A pale cloud of ash rose from it, almost making Hermione cough. At his comment, she felt herself blush. Draco noticed and smiled a blandly engaging smile. "I remember," she said tightly. "That doesn't mean you should just go hurrying off without me, you know. I thought we were in this together." "We seem to be in a lot of things together," Draco said, pulling off his jumper and throwing it on top of his cloak, and went to work on his shirt buttons. Hermione blinked at him. "Where did you go, Draco?" "Flu hub," he said, pulling his shirt off. He was wearing a t-shirt under it, and there was ash around the collar. "Looking for a lead on Harry?" "No, I just have a kinky thing for fireplaces. Yes, looking for a lead on Harry. And also to talk to Ginny." "Well, if you do that again, I'll—" He flung himself into the armchair, shedding ash all over the red leather, and went to work on the laces of his dragonhide boots. "You'll what?" "I've spent a bracing morning getting knocked into various fireplaces by security trolls at the Flu Hub while looking for your misplaced boyfriend. And you stand there with your hands on your hips and glare at me like I just bashed your cat in the head with a boot." Hermione glared at him. "Are you done?" Draco glared back. "No, I'm just getting started," he said, and yanked off his left boot and tossed it onto the floor. "I need tea." "Not until you take your antidote," said Hermione automatically. "Fuck my antidote," said Draco with great satisfaction. "Fuck it upside down and sideways." "As repartee goes, that was not up to your usual par," Hermione said. Draco took off his second boot and dropped it with a deliberate thud. "It's early yet." "I don't suppose you're going to tell me why the security trolls threw you into a fireplace at the Flu Hub?" Hermione asked. "Not that I can blame them, given your current mood." Draco scrubbed the back of his hand across his eyes, looking exasperated. This was possibly not the best move, as it succeeded in smearing streaks of ash across his cheekbones and forehead. "Because," he said, "I was trying to get the transportation clerk to hand over the travel records for yesterday. Everyone who passes through the Flu Hub has to fill out paperwork. I figured they'd have a record of where Potter went. Only he wouldn't let you see the records, Hermione gasped. She imagined him in the Flu Hub, by himself, making a scene, looking for those records. She could hardly blame him for that, could she? "This is why you should have brought me with you," she said, folding her arms. "Right. Because the only thing more fun than failing is failing with an audience." Hermione glanced sideways at him. He looked tired and filthy, black streaks in his pale hair, eyelashes clogged with soot. "Is that what you're fretting over?" "Not exactly." He was silent for a moment. "Is there any acceptable response to 'I love you' besides 'I love you too'?" Hermione felt herself go very still before replying. "Why are you asking?" "Research purposes." "Well, 'I know' is generally frowned on," Hermione said, "although it's an improvement on 'Oh no, not you too,' and, well, that makes one of us." "You're laughing at me," he said. "I'm not," she returned. "It depends on how it's meant." She looked at him curiously. "What's this about, anyway?" "Nothing." "Liar," Hermione said. He met her gaze with a defiant, bitter one, as if daring her to say more. "Wait a second," she said, and disappeared into the kitchen. Her wand was lying next to a merrily boiling pot of water on the stove. She doused the flame and took the wand in her hand. A few simple spells later, and she was back in the living room, a steaming mug of tea in her hand. "Here," she said, shoving it at Draco. He took it with a look of guarded surprise. "I thought you said 'I know what I said.'" She perched herself on the arm of the chair. "Draco, you have to stop thinking of this as something you can achieve by yourself." Draco glanced at her over the rim of his mug. The rising steam obscured his grey eyes, the expression in them. "I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about," he said lightly. "There are many things I know I can't achieve on my own, like world peace, or the ongoing search for a really intelligent Hufflepuff, or—" "I was talking about Harry," Hermione said sharply, interrupting his tirade. "You're not solely responsible for bringing him back." "I don't recall saying I was." Draco took a sip from his mug and regarded her coolly. She ignored him. "The reason they didn't have any of the records in the Flu Hub is because they send them to the transportation department in the ministry at the end of every shift," she said, "which I could have told you this morning if you'd asked." "How do you—" "I spent a summer interning at the ministry," Hermione said with some smugness. "After fourth year, you just have to turn everything into an epic quest. You're just like Harry." For a moment she was worried he was going to choke on his tea. He coughed, managed not to splutter. It was probably in the Malfoy family code of conduct. Malfoys do not splutter. And said, "Oh, that's creative. Potter runs away. We have to chase after him, and that makes me just like him." Hermione shrugged. "If I'm making the comparison, that means it's your fault." "Did you mix antidote into my tea?" Draco asked abruptly. "It tastes foul." "Probably because you already swallowed half a pint of ash earlier. It's all over your face." Draco gave her a sideways look. "And you're barely restraining yourself from going at me with a wet handkerchief. I can tell from your expression." "Not at all," Hermione lied. "Well, leave it. I think it gives me a dashing, rakish look. A look that says, dangerous, yet irresistible. Not to be trifled with. yet oddly vulnerable. Knowing that he could go on like this for hours, Hermione leaned close and looked him directly in the eye. "Yes, I put antidote in your tea," she said, "because I don't want you fainting on me later when we break into the Ministry and steal those transportation records." Draco almost dropped his mug. "What?" "You heard me." He looked at her with accusing grey eyes. "Could you not spring things like that on me when I'm holding mugs of boiling liquid? If I dropped it into my lap, we'd have a national tragedy on our hands." "Oh, give me that," Hermione said, and took the mug out of his hands and deposited it onto the table, then turned to look at him anxiously. "I wasn't joking, you know." "I know," he said. "You don't think it's a stupid idea?" she asked. "I think it's a very stupid idea," he said. "On the other hand, when has that ever stopped us?" "You have a point," she said. "All right then," he said. "Where do we start?" Hermione glanced over at the desk with its ornate quill set. "I think I should write a letter to Percy," she said. "It might not be the best way to begin, but it's as good a place to start as any." Harry's dreams had stopped making sense and had become an odd jumble of images. Some seemed like memories. Watching Hermione run across the snow towards the Quidditch pitch, Ron with his orange hat pulled down, trying to fix a broken broomstick with spellotape, Draco at his desk, writing industriously with his raven feather quill, and some were obviously nightmares. He dreamed he saw the corpses of Cedric Diggory and his parents tethered to posts under the lake, their hair drifting in the current like weeds. He dreamed he was a ghost haunting the manor, and he dreamed that he lay in a strange bed in a strange room, and that the room was full of flowers, and that Fleur Delacour was sitting in an armchair beside the bed, her long fair hair falling all around her, and a quizzical expression on her face. "You're awake?" she said, leaning forward with a smile. "I had begun to think that it would take an earthquake to wake you up." Harry blinked at her. "I'm not awake," he said. "I'm dreaming." Fleur leaned farther forward and put her hand on his arm. Her fingers were cool against his skin. "Ow!" Harry yelled and jerked his arm back. "You pinched me!" Her blue eyes danced. "I had to show you that you weren't dreaming, didn't I?" Harry looked around, startled all over again. He was in a pleasantly appointed bedroom, whose walls were painted pale yellow. A fire burned in a small brick fireplace. Colorful curtains were slung back over the windows, through which he could see a snowy landscape dotted with bare trees, mountains in the distance, and on the tables were vases of flowers, lilies and gardenias, marigolds and poppies, tulips and asters and phlox. "I would ask, where am I?" Harry remarked, "but that just sounds so stupid." "You're in Bulgaria," Fleur said, and got up from her armchair to sit on the edge of Harry's bed. "This is Victor's house." "Victor Crumb? Do you know any other Victors?" "No, but, well, it's not as if I was expecting him. I was in the flu hub in London." "You fainted," Fleur said. "Victor was there with his team, coming back from a match, and he saw you. You were very ill, Harry. You had quite a fever when he brought you here, and were delirious." "Bloody hell," Harry said, startled. "Can you get up and walk now?" Harry considered. He felt drained and tired, but not precisely ill anymore. His muscles ached slightly, and his right hand hurt, as though he had cut or injured it. He threw his legs over the side of the bed and stood up gingerly. For a moment, he felt lightheaded and reached for the bedpost.
"Where's Victor, anyway?"
he asked. "He is probably off writing," Fleur said. "This is his country house. We came here a few months ago because he wanted a quiet place to finish his book. It has been very dull for me, although, as you can see, I've been experimenting with flower magic." She waved a careless hand towards an enormous vase of tulips, then reached up and pulled on a small bell pull next to the bed. "Victor will be happy to see you up and around. He was worried." She pointed to a trunk at the foot of the bed. "All your clothes are in there," she said.
"Who put me in these pajamas?"
Harry asked, noticing for the first time that the bottoms had a design of enormous interlocking D's on them.
"Those are my regulation Durham string pajamas,"
said a voice from the doorway. It was Victor, who had come into the room very quietly and was looking at Harry with an amused expression.
"They suit you."
"Victor," Harry said, and couldn't help but to grin. "Fleur told me what you did, and I'm really—" Victor waved an ink-stained hand, looking acutely uncomfortable.
"That's all right," he said, ducking his head slightly. "Do not distress yourself."
He looked just as Harry remembered him, tall and duck-footed, although his hair was longer now and fell to his shoulders in shaggy, unkempt locks. His brows still beetled, and he was dressed in a rusty black pullover, stretched out of shape and worn Quidditch cords. There was ink on his sleeves, too. Fleur got up from the bed, went over to Victor, and put her arms around him. "You're so modest, darling," she said. Harry boggled somewhat. He had, of course, already figured out what Fleur had been doing in Victor's house, but it was still bizarre to see. Still, if it meant Victor was finally over his crush on Hermione, this could be nothing but good news. And it wasn't as if Fleur and Victor didn't have anything in common. They were both wealthy, had been Triwizard champions, and well known in the European wizarding community. Of course, Harry couldn't think of anything else they had in common beyond that, but he was sure there had to be something.
"I was hoping that perhaps you could read my latest chapter," Victor said to Fleur, his voice gloom-ridden. "I am afraid that it is boring."
"You're always worried it's boring, and it never is." Fleur let go of Victor and glanced over at Harry. "What about Harry, then?"
"He could read it too," Victor said, brightening. "It is always good to get a fresh perspective."
Said Harry. "Victor," said Fleur irritably, "I mean, what are we going to do with Harry?"
"Well, I think we should notify his friends first that—"
"No," Harry said quickly. "Please, don't tell anyone where I am. Promise me you won't. It's important. Please." "I don't—" Fleur began.
"I promise,"
Victor said, shooting his girlfriend a dark look.
"What can we do to help you, Harry?"
"I need to get to Romania," Harry said, "as soon as possible. And I'm sorry, but I can't tell you exactly where or why." He looked at their blank expressions. "I'm sorry to be like this, but it's important."
"Is this to do with he who must not be named?" Victor asked finally, breaking the silence. "Has the time finally come?"
With the smallest of movements, Harry nodded.
"All right, then," Victor said with a resolute nod. "We will help you however we can. Get dressed, Harry, and then come down to the hall to my study. I've got maps. If it is Romania you want, we'll figure out how to get you there."
It was the second time that Sirius had stood looking at a murder scene and thinking, in a dazed sort of fashion, that the human body really did contain a surprising quantity of blood. The body of Conrad Avery lay sprawled across the marble desk in his study. Papers were scattered everywhere, ink bottles knocked over, their contents drying blackly on the rug. Sirius hoped fervently that Avery had been dead before the horrific wounds that laced his body had been inflicted. His clothes were slashed to threads, and across his bare chest, arms, and throat, enormous gashes had been sliced, as if with the side of a knife. Blood was drying in sticky pools below the desk, on the rug, and the patches of bare floor. Avery's dead eyes bugged from his head, and his mouth was twisted in a grimace of terror. "Alistair was right," said Lupin, breaking the unpleasant silence. "Looks like a vivisectus curse. I've only seen those in history books." Sirius began pacing around the room. "Second murder on record, isn't it?" "Third, actually." "It just doesn't make any sense," said Sirius, shaking his head. "If Draco's hunch is right, and you-know-who was going around killing his Death Eaters, why wouldn't he take them to wherever he's hiding and torture them in front of the rest? He isn't given to making this kind of mess, usually. It's the killing curse and get out." "Perhaps it has something to do with being in Ron's body," Lupin said quietly, beginning a circuit of the far side of the room. The rug squelched wetly under his feet as he passed the desk. Sirius closed his eyes. When he had heard the news that you-know-who had taken over the body of Ron Weasley, it made him want to throw up. He couldn't bear to think about it, so instead turned away from Lupin to look at Avery's desk, and his attention was caught by something on the wall beside it. What he had first taken to be indiscriminate splatters of blood had suddenly resolved itself into a recognizable pattern. "Remus," he said, "come here." Sirius stepped closer to the wall as Lupin came to join him. Words, written in drying blood, were ornately scripted, running along the wall just above the fireplace mantel. "Take heed, for I hold vengeance in my hand, to hurl upon their heads that break my law." "Alistair said there was writing on the wall," Lupin said, "but he couldn't make heads or tails of it." "Alistair never read any Muggle literature," Sirius said. "This is Shakespeare." "The playwright?" "Yes. I recognize the quote. It's from Richard III. He shook his head. "He's using it to say that Avery broke his law, but the capital M suggests that he's taking it a step farther." "How's that?" Lupin asked, looking confused. "I think he believes that because he's taken Ron's body, and Ron is supposed to be a talented diviner, in his mind, I think he believes himself to be a god," Sirius said. It took much longer than Hermione had hoped it would for Percy to respond to her letter. Hours upon hours waiting, and she finally received a terse response. "No, it's too dangerous." She hurled the letter into the fire and wrote Percy again, more imploringly this time. She invoked Ron and the danger his body was in, and the fact that Harry had gone off to face you-know-who alone, and had no idea that his worst enemy and best friend were now one and the same. She sealed the letter with wax and sent it on with one of the hotel's owls. She decided not to tell Draco about Percy's letter. His health had taken a sharp turn since he'd come back from the flu hub, covered in ashes, and was still in a bad temper. Later that afternoon, they went to Gringotts to see if the goblins knew if Harry had visited his vault since his disappearance. When they were sent to the manager of the branch, a goblin who had been in charge of Draco's vault since he was 7 years old, he refused to give them any news of Harry, and Draco had slammed his fist down on the table so hard that the security trolls came running. Hermione was actually glad when they were escorted out onto the street. Or at least, she was glad until Draco punched the wall beside the door so hard that he tore the skin off his knuckles, and she had to drag him back through Diagon Alley, trying not to get silvery blood everywhere. Back in the hotel room, Draco was quiet, sitting on the edge of the bathtub while she tended to his hand with a heel-fast poultice and bandage strips from the basic Medi-Magic kit she had packed with her. "You have to stop being so careless," she said, giving the bandage a hard tug that made him wince. "The poison slows your healing down." "I'm not entirely sure that punching one's hand into a wall counts as carelessness," he said, taking his hand back and examining the neat job she had done on it. She opened her mouth to make a sharp reply when a tapping sound on the window stopped her. "That sounds like an owl," Draco said. "Do you think it's your letter back from Weasley?" "Let's find out," Hermione said, and left the bathroom to walk over to the window and flip the latch to let the owl in. It was carrying another letter from Percy, and Hermione took the missive before sending it on its way with a nut. "What's it say?" Draco asked as he came out of the bathroom and went to stand next to her. "It's a list of ministry passwords," Hermione said, clutching the letter to her chest. "Oh, thank goodness for Percy." "He's a wonder, all right," he said as he glanced over her shoulder to read the letter. "I take back everything bad I ever said about him and his family. Passwords and a map. Weasley is a flame-haired sex god." Hermione laughed and folded the letter carefully into her robe pocket before going back into the other room to change. Later, she and Draco were to be found at the back entrance to the ministry that Percy had directed them to. It was through the gardens, and they went slipping around the building through the rose bushes that grew, high and laden with unseasonal blossoms, up to the lower windows of the building. Thorns caught at Hermione's jeans and her wool jumper, and she swore under her breath as Draco pulled her forward, his hand clamped firmly around her wrist. He turned back and looked at her, amused. "Language, sweetheart." Hermione glowered at him. "Roses in January," she whispered. "Rather romantic for the ministry, but awfully difficult to navigate." "That probably was the idea," Draco returned as they came to the back entrance, which turned out to be a pair of black doors set impressively between two carved marble pillars. The same roses twined up the pillars and across the top of the door. Draco brushed pale red petals out of his hair and off his shoulders, then made a face. "Have you got the passwords?" "Mm-hmm." Hermione took the parchment out of her pocket. "Vera prima materia," she said, and the doors flew open. Absently, Draco reached for her hand again. "Come on," he said, and together they went through. Victor had exactly the sort of study Harry would have wanted had it ever occurred to him to want to study. It was messy. Stacks of parchment wobbled precariously atop teetering piles of books. All the desk drawers were pulled out, showing a colorful array of empty wrappers. Broken quills, ink bottles with interesting things written on them in Bulgarian, and crumpled pages of Quidditch magazines were scattered everywhere. Empty coffee mugs littered the top of the desk, along with teetering pyramids of half-eaten containers of Bulgarian yogurt. Despite all this, it was surprisingly cozy. The chairs were heaped with colorful pillows, and a bright copper kettle hovered above the leaping flames in a small grate. The room smelled of smoke and unfamiliar spices. Through the curtained windows, Harry could see a range of beautiful blue-shaded mountains in the distance. The sky above them was alive with clouds, heavy and dark with potential rain. Standing by the window, Harry tried to imagine himself ever having a study like this someday, far in the future. He would take up pipe smoking and collect old Quidditch books, and maybe write his memoirs. How I Saved the World, except not really. Hermione would have to help him write them, and Draco would make fun of him for smoking a pipe, and Ron would borrow his Quidditch books and spill things on them, and Ginny would observe it all with a faintly bemused smile. Assuming they were all still alive at the end of this, of course. "Harry," Victor said, waving a large, grubby hand in front of his face. "Are you paying attention?" "Yes, Romania," he said. "It's right there." He poked the map with his finger, right in the center of Romania. Immediately, it expanded to fill the surface of the map. Mountain ranges, towns, the blue veins of rivers sprang into life. Harry's eyes widened. "Cool," he said. "Don't Muggle maps do that?" Victor asked. Harry shook his head. "No." "What do you do if you need a more detailed map, then?" "Oh, usually Muggles just carry around a whole bunch of different maps for the same place. My uncle had 8 or 9 just for England." "How terribly inconvenient," said Fleur, who was leaning back against the windowsill. "Yes, terribly," Harry said as he gazed, fascinated, at the map. Tiny blocks of text move across the parchment, telling him, "Here are dragons, and here are vampires, and here there is dark wizardry." "You can have this map," Victor said, as a thought seemed to occur to him. "I have a secret flat in Prague that is safe. I'll take you there and—" "Isn't Aiden staying at that flat now?" Fleur asked, her tone curious. "Yes, but he will clear out if I ask him. I'll operate there now and send him off," Victor said, rolling the map up. "Then I shall come back for you, Harry. Take anything you like from the house. Money, food, books if you want. Any of the weapons." "Weapons?" Harry said faintly. "Yes, swords, pikes, hatchets, maces, crossbows, daggers. I collect old Muggle artillery," said Victor, causing Harry to entertain a sudden mental vision of himself attacking Voldemort with a hatchet. "Take whatever you like." "Thanks, but I don't think I'll need any weapons," Harry said. Grimly, Victor nodded, then snatched up a dark red cloak from a peg by the door and apparated away. This left Harry and Fleur alone in the room together. After a moment, he cleared his throat. "Victor sure has an awful lot of weapons for a Quidditch player," he remarked. "Victor believes it is worthwhile for wizards to learn to use some Muggle weapons," Fleur said. "He's been working on convincing the others in the old crew to use them." "Oh, come, Harry. You didn't know Victor was in the Resistance, didn't you?" "You're a bright boy." "Not really," Harry said. "Hermione's the smart one." "You miss her?" Fleur asked casually. "I'd rather not talk about Hermione, or Draco if you don't mind," he said. "Well, I do mind," said Fleur. "I have not sat beside your bed for hours and listened to you raving in your sleep for nothing. Why are they not with you when you need them so desperately? I cannot imagine anything you could have done to drive either of them away. They care for you too much." "Maybe they ran off with each other," Harry suggested. "If you're going to lie to me," said Fleur, "you're going to have to think of a better lie than that." Harry sighed. "All right, if you must know. I left without telling them where I was going." "You did what?" Harry took a wary step back. "You're not going to slap me, are you? I remember when you slapped Draco." Fleur took a deep breath. "No, I am not going to slap you, although I think it would do you some good if I did." She shook her head. "Dumbledore must be so disappointed in you, Harry." Harry's face changed at that. His green eyes went wide and stunned, as if she really had slapped him. "I didn't have a choice," he said. "It was the only way to keep them safe." "Safe from what? You know who?" Fleur demanded, and held up her hand before he could reply. "I know what you're going to say, Harry. But are you so arrogant to think that you must stand alone?" Harry's mouth opened a little at that. "It isn't arrogance," he snapped, his voice suddenly hot with anger. "I couldn't bear it if anything happened to either of them. I wouldn't be any good to anyone if it did." "This is hardly about them," Fleur returned. "It is about you and what you need and your own fear of weakness. I can tell you now, Harry, if either of them died, you could bear it. You would bear it for as long as you had to, until you were done, because that is your nature, and that is why Dumbledore has put his faith in you." "What are you saying?" Harry's eyes flashed. "That I should let my friends lie down and die for me, for my own personal pointless quest?" "Your quest is neither pointless nor personal," said Fleur, "and if they want to lie down and die for you, if they must lie down and die for you, then you have to let them. There's a reason you have the friends you do, Harry. There is a reason you chose them all. Ron, Hermione, Ginny, Draco as well. And it is not just because you love them, but because you need them." Harry looked at her, and the bright, angry light faded out of his eyes. "I am prepared to die," he said. "I've thought a lot about it, but I'm not prepared for them to die." "Death comes, Harry, whether we are prepared for it or not. You, above all people, should know that." "I dreamed I died," Harry said. "Last night, I dreamed I was a ghost in the manor, and that 10 years had passed, and I'd won the battle, and I died. But they were still alive. Everyone was still alive but me, and they'd forgotten all about me. It was like I had never existed at all." He looked down at his hands. "Maybe I'm more selfish than I thought," he said. "Your skills are not only warrior skills, Harry," she said, her tone gentle. He gave her a crooked smile. "Maybe you should be the one saving the world," he said. "I would not want to," she said. "I am sorry for you, that you must be the one to do it." "It's all right," Harry said, his green eyes sharp and even a little cold. Fleur fought the urge to shiver. "At least I know what I have to do next." Before Fleur could reply, there was a soft pop, and Victor apparated back into the room. His ears were red from cold, but he seemed pleased. "Come, Harry," he said. "It is time for us to go." Once they found themselves inside the offices of the Department of Transportation and Flu Travel, Hermione and Draco found themselves going through stacks of files. There were files for every day's worth of flu hub transport, and they were quite extensive. Long blue columns of names and destinations showed who had left, while corresponding red columns indicated arrivals. So far, Hermione had not recognized any of the names, and she was beginning to despair, when suddenly a familiar name caught her eye. "Victor Crumb!" she exclaimed. Draco, who had been casually perusing the large stack before him, looked up at her and raised an eyebrow. "What about that slack-jawed Slavic gorilla?" "Don't be rude," Hermione snapped. "I found Victor's name in and around the time that Harry portkeyed himself out of the club." Draco stared at her. "And that means what, precisely?" he asked. "Well, it looks like about a half an hour later, Victor Crumb left the flu hub with his Bulgarian teammates. The names aren't listed, but there were 8 of them." "Too many for a team," Draco said, sitting up straighter. "One too many." Hermione's hands tightened on the parchment. "Harry knows Victor, trusts him." Draco leaned over the desk, and together they stared down at the words inked in blue. "Victor Crumb?" Durhamstrang, Bulgarian captain, and teammates. 8. London, Sophia. They went to the flu hub in Sophia, he said. From there, I assume Victor would apparate home. Hermione nodded. His family home's outside Sophia. If we had a fireplace, we could try to call on him at his home. There's plenty of flu powder here. But we can't flu internationally without a hub, Draco protested. From the Ministry, you can flu anywhere, Hermione said quietly. No restrictions. Draco inhaled a breath. Where's the flu powder? In the cabinets, Hermione said. Don't take too much. They'll know someone's been here. Draco already had his hand inside the cabinet on the wall. Of course, he said, and with a fiendish grin retrieved a canister of industrial-strength flu powder from the cabinet. Got it, he said, and I know where there's a fireplace. Upstairs in my father's office. When he returned to the chess room, he noticed that all signs of the ritual had long been cleared away, and the long mahogany table had been returned to the center of the room, along with its many low-backed armchairs, upholstered in dark green silk and metallic thread. Rhys sat miserably in her cage, making soft noises of despair, but he hardly heard her. The table itself was scattered with empty silver plates and wine glasses, half full of something darker than wine. A number of watchful, wide-eared goblins sat in the high-backed chairs along one side of the table, and at the far end was seated a man with dark hair and black eyes that glittered in the dim light of the candles. Gabriel, said the boy, inclining his head towards the black-haired man. I'm glad to see that you and your cohorts have not left yet. Gabriel looked up at him and smiled, showing the whiteness of his fangs. We live to serve only you, my lord, he remarked. In response, the boy turned to the small creature on his left. You were at the ministry today, Mortensen? Yes, my lord, said Mortensen complacently. Tell me, the boy continued, did you learn anything useful from your observations? I know that there were rumors that Draco Malfoy had been spotted, said Mortensen slyly. The boy looked almost interested. Indeed? He asked. Yes, and he was not alone, my lord. A girl was with him. A girl with long brown hair, the little spy clarified. At that, the boy looked sharply at the goblin. And what were they up to? He asked, his voice cool and removed, although something began to stir behind his ribcage. That hunger again, returning with full force. I cannot speak to that, my lord, said Mortensen. It would have required me leaving my post to go investigate the rumours. I must have her, said the boy, in a tone so soft that only Gabriel's sharp hearing was able to catch it. The dark-haired man looked at the boy, and the Dark Lord sensed his gaze and held it. The girl, he said. Find the girl. I'd very much like to see her again. The vampire bowed his head. As you wish, my lord. Bring her back alive, the boy continued, almost as an afterthought, and unharmed. Then he turned to the room at large and waved a hand towards the crowded table. And someone said word to Lucius that I wish to speak to him. There's something very important that we need to discuss. They climbed the back stairs to the wing of the ministry Hermione had never seen before. She was accustomed to the slightly used look of the ministry's lower floors, but here everything was polished mahogany and heavy velvet curtains, and massive marble vases, spilling undying flowers. At the end of the long corridor was a set of polished ebony doors bearing a silver nameplate. Lucius Malfoy, Chairman in Perpetuity. Draco set his hand to the latch, but Hermione stopped him. "How do you know he's not in?" she asked, and couldn't help glancing down the hallway to see if they had been spotted. "It's noon," Draco said, as if this explained everything. "Our father always leaves before then to go to lunch." "How nice that he can take the time off from being evil to feed himself," Hermione replied sarcastically. "Indeed," Draco replied, and couldn't help the ghost of a smile that flitted across his face as he said it. Then he turned the knob on the door and went inside. Hermione followed him and shut the door hard behind her. Lucius Malfoy's office was the size of a professional Quidditch pitch. From the vast windows, hung with green brocade curtains, she could see across the river to the dome of St. Paul's Church. Hermione turned away from the window and saw Draco standing by the desk, which was mahogany and roughly the size of a Hogwarts dinner table. A number of expensive toys littered the polished surface. A clear glass globe in which a perfect miniature of Malfoy Manor hung, suspended. A strangely misshapen paperweight in the shape of a frog, and a heavy silver box slitted atop a stack of folded parchments. "Maybe we should head back to the hotel," Hermione said anxiously. "I'm sure they have international flu portals." "Which we wouldn't be able to use until morning," Draco said. "I didn't want to wait. Did you?" "Waiting has nothing to do with it," Hermione said, glaring at his back. "You're just being impulsive." With a shrug, Draco opened the flu powder box and turned it on its side, tipping a handful of sparkling powder into his open palm. Crossing the room to the fireplace, he tossed it into the empty grate. There was a sound like a soft implosion, and fire leapt up, illuminating the room, turning the edges of his hair to unlikely gold. The flame in the grate turned a dark red, signaling its readiness. Without looking at him, Hermione went past him to the fireplace and knelt down and drew her wand. She held it out towards the flames. "Auditory," she whispered. There was a distant crackling noise that reminded her of the static on a telephone line, and then a familiar voice said something Hermione didn't understand. She struggled to remember the bits of Bulgarian she'd picked up 4th year. "Victor?" she called. "It's Hermione. Hermione Granger. Chevalis Lamy." A moment passed. Then a familiar waterfall of silver-blonde hair, enormous blue eyes, and full red lips shone out from the flames. "Fleur?" Hermione exclaimed. "What are you—" But Fleur was staring right past her, at Draco, her eyes sparkling. "Draco!" she shrieked. "Draco, mon petit, I have missed you so very, very much." Draco sat back on his heels, his mouth twitching into a grin. Fleur had much the same effect on boys that Draco had on girls, and no one with Draco's vanity could fail to be moved by Fleur's enthusiastic admiration. "Hello, Fleur," he said. "How's that house I bought for you working out?" "It is lovely," she enthused. "Victor and I enjoy visiting it very much." Draco's eyebrows shot up. "Since when are you two an item?" "Do not be insulting," said Fleur breezily. "Our love is pure." Draco felt stricken speechless by this piece of information, and Fleur laughed. "Victor and I have an understanding," she said, "although we often disagree." "We're looking for Harry, Fleur," Hermione interjected, annoyed that Draco seemed to have forgotten whose fireplace they were using for this little conversation. "It's very, very important that we find him. I know he was in the flu hub with Victor the other day. If you're with him, you must have seen him come through." "He left here with Victor not too long ago," Fleur said, an unexpected gentleness in her tone. "He was very ill when he arrived." "Is he all right?" Hermione asked anxiously. "He's fine," Fleur said. "Quite recovered." Hermione went on quickly. "Do you know where he went?" "Yes," Fleur said. "We sent him to Victor's apartment." Then suddenly she broke off with an exclamation. The sound that had reminded Hermione of crackling telephone static returned, louder than before. Fleur's head whipped around as if she were suddenly aware of a presence behind her. Her mouth began to form words, and then, with a flailing yelp, she vanished. A moment later, Victor's head appeared among the flames. He glowered at her. "Hermione," he said, "I cannot tell you where Harry is." Hermione was stunned. "We just want Harry to be all right," she said. "There are things he doesn't know, things that could put him in danger. Victor, please." Victor looked at her, his expression pained. Then he said grudgingly, "He is in Prague, but more than that I cannot tell you." "Please," Hermione repeated. "We haven't much time." Victor took a deep breath, and then his hands appeared from the flames, stretching themselves out towards Hermione and Draco. "I could bring you through," he said. "We're in the Ministry," Hermione said quickly. "The alerts might be triggered." She looked at Draco. "Right?" He nodded, looking a little dazed, as if events were transpiring too quickly for him to process. "Yes, but what other choice have we got?" Hermione bit her lip, then turned back to the fire, and held her hand out, and Victor's much larger fingers closed around it. She could feel the heat of the fire, but it seemed distant and not frightening. It lapped against her skin like hot water, scalding without burning. She shut her eyes as Victor pulled her forward, and felt weightless for a moment. Then her feet found purchase, and she stumbled. Victor righted her, and she looked up, opening her eyes. She stood in the center of a small room that she recognized, as she had been here the summer after 4th year. The familiar furnishings and walls were lined with books, and the empty fireplace in front of her, the bricks that formed the back of it gone transparent. She could see through them, as if she looked through a window, giving a clear view into Lucius's office, without any wavering distortion. She could see Draco kneeling there, looking at them through the fire. The flames seemed to look up around him, darkening the fine, pale skin to bronze. Victor held his hand out to him. "Come along now." But he had gotten to his feet. For a moment, Hermione could see only the lower half of his body as he stood in front of the fireplace. He was reaching up for something, and when he lowered his arm and backed away, Hermione saw that he was carrying one of the lighted tapers from the top of the mantel. He turned away and walked across the room, away from her, and then held the flame of the candle to the bottom of the brocade curtains and waited for them to catch alight. "Draco!" Hermione half screamed. "What are you doing?" But Fleur had caught at her arm. "Let him," she said. The curtains were burning now. Hermione could smell the reek of singed fabric. Draco stood where he was, watching the flames lick up the velvet. There was an absorbed look on his face, as if he were mastering a tricky Quidditch move. Abruptly, he flung the burning taper to the floor and turned away. Then he was on his knees in front of the grate, reaching his hands out, and Victor took him by the wrists and pulled him through. He landed lightly on his feet next to Hermione inside the circle of wavering flame, and turned to her, breathless, his eyes full of light and defiance. "Go ahead," he said. "Scream at me." Before Hermione could say anything, Fleur stepped in between them. "There will be no screaming," she snapped, holding her hands up imperiously. She was a slight girl, but taller than Hermione, and when she drew herself up to her full height, she was imposing. The moment passed, however, as she flung her arms around Draco's neck and kissed him on both cheeks. Hermione rolled her eyes. "It is lovely to see you," Fleur declared. "You look different. Taller?" "Not likely," Draco said. "Perhaps I was standing in a hole last time we met." Fleur smiled, then said more soberly, "Now, about Harry." "Fleur," said Victor from the corner of the room. His gaze swept from Draco to Hermione to light upon Fleur. "You gave Harry your word that you wouldn't tell." "There is no point in protesting that they are here now, you know," Fleur said, crossing her arms over her chest. "Victor, they came seeking their friend." "Who has no wish to see them," Victor grated. "Then why did you bring them here?" Fleur protested furiously. Victor's craggy brows drew together, shadowing his deep-set eyes. "I don't know. Perhaps it was a mistake, but the situation didn't look safe." But Hermione wasn't listening. She was looking at Draco, and realized, with a thumping sense of horror, that he had gone very white. "Draco," she said, her voice an urgent whisper, "I think you should take another draught of your antidote." "Be quiet," he hissed, but it was too late. Fleur and Victor were staring at them both, arrested mid-argument. Fleur stared at him, hard. "Draco, are you all right?" "He's not all right," Hermione said, scrabbling at her belt for the antidote flask. "He's very ill. He needs his antidote." "I do not," Draco said through his teeth. "I'm fine." "Prove it then," Hermione said. "Walk towards me right now." Draco bent his head and gave a look from beneath his veiled lids that made her think of sharp silver knives. It was a look meant to cut the skin off her bones with its disdain, and she flinched back a little. "Fine," he said, and took a step forward, and then another, until he stood in the center of the room. For a moment, Hermione thought he had been telling the truth. He stood with his back very straight and looked at her, and then a greenish color flooded up into the pallor of his face, and he pitched forward without a sound. Victor dashed across the room with a seeker's speed and was just in time to catch him as he fell. Harry sat back in his chair, being very careful not to spill any tea from his full cup onto the thin parchment pages of Quidditch Through the Ages. He wasn't entirely sure why he'd brought it with him when he'd left the flat looking for a quiet place to buy something to eat. Partially, perhaps because all the books in Victor's flat had been in Slavic languages he didn't recognize, but there was probably more to it than that. He let his hand trail across a page, looked up and stared out the window. The Malotranska Karvarna had been the closest thing he could find that resembled a leaky cauldron in this unfamiliar city of cobbled streets and colorful, gabled old buildings. Or Diagon Alley looked as if time had stopped for it 100 years ago. The wizarding section of Prague looked as if it had drifted out of a fairy tale. The small coffee shop he was in now was half timbered, with a soft, mellow glow emanating from hovering golden globes that floated overhead. Rows of pastries as gorgeous as jewelry gleamed under a glass-fronted countertop, if jewelry had been decorated with whipped cream, chocolate, cherries, and sugary slivers of almonds. It was beautiful and strange, and everything looked delicious, and it made Harry so horribly lonely that he wanted to crawl under the nearest chair. He had never really been out of England before, and he had always thought that when he did go, it would be with friends. He vaguely imagined accompanying Ron and Ginny to visit Bill in Egypt, taking some romantic trip to Italy with Hermione. Draco had traveled all over the continent, and they'd spend all of an afternoon's detention together once, talking about where they would go if they could go anywhere. Harry looked away from the window to stare, unseen, into his coffee cup. When Victor had dropped him off in the entryway of the flat in Prague, they'd carried everything into the bedroom, where a very annoyed note from Aidan Lynch, apparently more than slightly cheesed off at being told to clear out of the flat immediately for no apparent reason, was stuck into the frame of a mirror, and left it all piled on the bed. Victor had seemed anxious and withdrawn, showing no desire to show Harry around, which Harry felt was just as well, as all he wanted in that moment was to be left alone. Before he left, though, Victor made him promise not to go outside the flat after sunset, citing that agents of you-know-who often prowled the streets after dark. Harry had promised, and Victor had nodded gravely, and said that he would return tomorrow with all the aid he could bring with him. He had thanked both him and Fleur for their help, and the Bulgarian seeker apparated away, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Now his mind returned to the dream he'd told Fleur about. In it, he had been a ghost inside the manor, walking its empty halls. He had wandered them until he'd found Draco inside the library, which had looked just as it had the last time Harry had seen it. But Draco looked 10 years older, and sat behind the desk just like his father, and regarded Harry with emotionless surprise. "There are so many ghosts in this manor," he had said. "I never thought you would be one of them. What brings you back?" "I think someone called for me," Harry had replied. "Was it you?" Draco had shaken his head. "I would never call for you," he'd said. "You couldn't be bothered with me while you were alive. Why would you be bothered with me after you were dead?" The library door had opened then, and Hermione had come in. She hadn't seen Harry at all, but had crossed the room to Draco and put her arms around him and kissed him. Draco had accepted the kiss with the ease of long familiarity. Even in the dream, the sting of jealousy had been a physical thing. Harry felt it now, like a knot in his stomach, and wondered what it meant. "Old ghosts keeping you up?" Hermione had asked. Draco had smiled up at her and said, "Only the kind that come back too late." A sharp pain in his hand made Harry jump. The coffee had sloshed over the rim of his cup and burnt his fingers. He set the cup down hastily on the polished surface of the table and glanced towards the front of the shop. The late afternoon sun streamed through the tinted glass window, and through it Harry could see the shadows of robed wizards hurrying by on the street outside. "No owls," Victor had said, but he hadn't said anything about Harry not being allowed to write letters. He had no intention of sending, or at least not today. Harry felt in his pocket for his self-inking quill, found it, and began looking in a desultory fashion for a bit of parchment to write on. It was hours till sunset anyway, he told himself. He had plenty of time. Hermione sat on the edge of the bed in Fleur and Victor's room, turning the silver antidote flask over and over in her fingers. She had managed to wake Draco up and get him to drink some of it before he sunk back into unconsciousness. Victor had carried him to the bed and laid him down on it before Fleur had shooed him out, muttering, "This is all your fault." The bedroom was suffused with a soft, mellow light, a light that made Hermione think of warm autumn evenings and sleeping cats. The torches on the walls burned with a rosy glow, and there were fine, red, open-weave curtains all around the bed. Fleur was sitting on the bed beside him now, her head inclined. Her long hair spilled down and over her shoulders and veiled Draco's face behind a curtain of white silk. When she raised her head and looked at Hermione, her blue eyes were very dark. "Poison, you said?" "Poison," Hermione confirmed in a small, dull voice. "And he's not getting any better. I thought the antidote was going to fix things, but it hasn't. I just don't know what to do." Fleur put her slim fingers against the pulse in Draco's throat, her expression thoughtful. Then she slipped a hand into the collar of Draco's shirt and drew out the epicilical charm on its chain before Hermione could protest. "So, here it is," she said, her tone reflective. "I asked Harry what he had done with it, but he was so feverish." "He gave it back to Draco," Hermione said. "Typical," said Fleur, "as if such a gift, once freely given, can so easily be given back." She let the charm fall and sat back, drawing the covers absent-mindedly over Draco as she did so. It struck Hermione as odd to see Fleur being so gentle, but then she remembered Fleur's little sister and the fierce possessiveness the other girls seemed to feel towards Gabrielle. "Thank you for taking care of Harry," Hermione said suddenly, "and for telling us he was here. I know Victor didn't want you to." "Victor is honest to a fault," said Fleur, "but he did not sit with Harry while he was feverish. He did not hear him shouting out in his sleep for you. He's gone to Romania, if you must know." "Romania?" Hermione squeaked. Fleur nodded. "And perhaps it would be best if you were to go now, before Draco wakes up." "No," said Hermione. "I couldn't leave him behind, especially not after Harry—" She broke off, refusing to finish that sentence. Fleur shook her head. "Very well," she said. "I believe Victor is in the kitchen. It is where he usually goes to sulk." Hermione looked again and heard Fleur's voice from the doorway before she turned to go. "You have, I think, been hurt enough," she said, and Hermione knew that she wasn't speaking to her, but to Draco. "I have done great wrong in the past, and if you'll allow me, before you go, allow me to undo it." He was in the armory, a part of the fortress that looked and operated much like his own study back at Malfoy Manor. Lucius sat in one of the plush velvet chairs, idly twirling his wand in between his fingers. He was thinking. Ever since the ritual, something had changed in his master, something that, on a fundamental level, he had no name for. True, when he had first taken up residence in Ron Weasley's body, the mind of Lord Voldemort had been clear. Lucius had seen it, and even saw further back to the boy he had once been, the dark and slender figure of Tom Riddle, always prone to twirling a wand between slim, pale fingers, and smiling. Oh, that smile, so disdainful, so arrogant, admitting no flaw or weakness. But now, I am reminded of her everywhere I turn. Who could he be talking about? Not Pansy, surely, for the Dark Lord had disposed of her, a fact which he had gleefully shared with Lucius, and which Lucius had not cared to hear. It was crude and unbecoming of a pure blood to satisfy their lust in such a manner. So, if Pansy was no longer the obsession on which the Dark Lord's mind was bent, then who? The image of a girl with a fall of unruly brown hair sprang instantly to his mind. Hermione Granger, the girl Draco had once tried to pass off as his girlfriend. Of course, that had been Harry Potter disguised as his son and making such claims. But still, she was friends with him, and had been with Weasley as well. A small blossom of disgust began to unfurl inside Lucius's stomach. His gaze out the window had become blank, seen beyond the forests, seeking out the manor that was leagues away, its power wedded to his, its magic running in his blood. I am a Malfoy, he thought, born of noble blood, and my allegiance is to the Dark Lord. His tastes should not matter to me, no matter how debase they become. The Weasleys are noble born as well, said a vicious little voice in the back of his mind. And what of it? He snapped back. Well, it returned, is it not possible that the will of one so nobly born could seep through and somehow ruin the man within, making him nothing more than a shell of what he once was? The spinning wand in Lucius's fingers stilled. That's blasphemy even to think. Is it? Returned the voice. Or are you too afraid to think it because you know it might be true? Lucius thought of Voldemort, of the boy Tom that he had known through all his innumerable and agonizing magical transformations. Remembered this last alteration, where the very bones inside his skin had melted and turned to smoke. But this time something had changed for real, perhaps forever. Whatever desire or desperate longing had set itself up inside the Dark Lord, and might have been twisted by him, but the drive was clearly not his own. Perhaps it would be best to kill him? To save him from the wreck of his own mind and obviously warped motivation? Might it not turn him back into the master that he had once revered and worshipped? After all, what death divides, it would also destroy. Yes, that might suffice. But how to do it? A knock at the door interrupted his musings. Yes, he intoned irritably. Who is it? The door opened a crack, and one of Gabriel's vampire minions stuck his pale-faced head around the frame.
The Dark Lord has sent for you, Lucius,
said the creature without preamble. Can't it wait? Lucius asked, showing perhaps more of his annoyance than he meant to. The vampire regarded him with something akin to surprise, although it was hard to say. Vampires' expressions were notoriously hard to read.
You wish me to tell the Dark Lord that you refused his summons?
Of course not, Lucius snapped. I'm coming, just give me a moment.
Very well,
said the vampire, as he slunk away from the door, not bothering to close it. Disgusting undead creature, Lucius thought haltingly, before he sheathed his wand and began to cross the room to the open door. He would have to put away his thoughts of subterfuge for the present. Once he was alone, he could return to them. But for now, it was best to play the role of the dutiful servant. This he could accomplish, at least until he came up with a better and more resolute plan. And that is all for this chapter, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. Like, comment, subscribe to the channel if you're new here. Hello. Yeah, thank you again, and I will see you all in the next one. Good night.